Hallo liebe Motorsportfreunde, ich begrüße Sie zu einer neuen Folge von unserer Serie Interviews mit Formel-1-Fahrern in der Winterpause. Und heute sind wir zu Gast hoch über den Dächern von London bei Martin Brundle. Er war nicht nur ein exzellenter Rennfahrer, er ist auch der Experte schlechthin im Fernsehen. Hello Martin, nice to have you on our program.
Great to see you in London, Michael.
Thank you very much. I just told our viewers that you not only had been a great racing driver, you are the expert worldwide on television, on Formula One, and many of the nerds in Germany, they rather watch Sky England than the German channels, and mainly because of you, I would say. I think that's kind of a compliment, I would say.
It's a great compliment, thank you. I didn't realize that so much, but I mean, you call me a great racing driver, that's also a big compliment. I'm not sure I'd use that word, but I did a pretty good job over a number of years. I think I was a very good Formula One driver. I might have been a great sports car driver where I seem to have more success, and maybe my driving style, my mentality meant somehow I felt invincible in a sports car where I didn't in a Formula One car, but maybe the competition was a bit higher. You know, Michael Schumacher and Ayrton Senna and Prost and all of the guys that I raced against in that. But I've been incredibly lucky. I've had 2 careers in Formula One, first driving, of course, as you say, and then with the media. And in many respects, I sort of see my driving career as like a fact-finding mission, like an education for my media career. That's how it turned out in the end. And so I think I'm 24 years into that now.
And now, 7 weeks before the new season, are you already start to get excited, or are you still in the winter break mode?
No, I'm always excited about F1. I never switch off in my mind. I think you're the same. Every day I'm reading the stories and ringing people, understanding what's going on. So actually, Christmas and New Year period, I feel a bit frustrated sometimes. I think, let's just get on with this now. And so I've already been making some features ready for this year. I mean, we have 14 hours live per weekend on Sky at every Grand Prix. That's a lot of content. Obviously, most of that is track action, but so we've got to start building up our features and our contacts and our ideas. So that's what January is all about. And your travel and your visas and just generally, and also, particularly as a racing driver, actually, your other life gets compressed into a couple of months, and it's insurances, dentists, you know, medicals for your licenses. Somehow it always happens around now, because that's how it's been for me for 36 years of the 9 months of the year you're on the road going racing. So it's always been about getting all the basics in fundamentals of life sorted out now.
Okay, let's go into detail and sit down now.
Absolutely.
Okay, Martin, you mentioned already your time with Senna, Prost, Piquet, Mansell, the big 4. Now we are heading into maybe something similar. We have Hamilton and Vettel, let's call them the old horses, and we have Verstappen and Leclerc. Do you think we can have a revival of these days when you were driving?
Yes, I do. I'm really looking forward to 2020 in particular, because we have a lot of continuity with the cars and the teams and drivers, which always closes the pack a little bit more. And yeah, we've got the young guns, haven't we? The young knights, and they want to knock King Lewis off the top. So we might just get something we were denied, really. Senna and Schumacher, we sadly, tragically were denied, weren't we? That great battle, the new pretender to the king. I'd like to see that now. Max and Charles versus Lewis, Seb. We've lost Fernando, unfortunately, and don't count out Lando. And for me, I'm a big fan of Carlos Sainz and George Russell. We've got a lot of good kids in Formula One now. So, and they're confident. They're confident in the car. They're confident in front of camera. They're not frightened of somebody like Lewis. And I like the way they drive, because they've come through Formula 2 and Formula 3, which you see crazy. They've opened up my mind on some overtaking opportunity. They're prepared. They're not scared inside the car. The cars are, I often joke the safest place to be at a Formula One race is in the car these days, and not in, not a marshal or in the pit lane or something. But they're prepared to always have a go with a unconventional overtaking, and you see a lot of that in F2 because they're desperate when they're in F2. And I like that. I like that they're open-minded, they're fearless.
Yeah, but the rivalry seems to be not as intense as it used to be 30 years ago. I mean, the 4 people I mentioned, they were naughty on and off the track. They didn't like each other. Nowadays, they get along quite well, these 4. Why is it? Is it a different generation? Why was it so much more intense in those days?
I don't get it at all. Today's Instagram-driven world, joking with each other, best friends. How can that last? How can you be such an intense rival? I mean, we had friendships in the past, but eventually that would be broken because you'd end up fighting over the same corner at the same time. And in a way, you've got to. I mean, I remember even my best friend Martin Brundle. It was Estoril, 1995. He was in the McLaren, I was in the Ligier. I came up to pass him. I just pitted. My car was much quicker than his. And he wouldn't yield quickly enough for me. So in turn 5, I just pushed him off the road. And he went down the barriers, skimming the barriers. And I'd do the same today. I would definitely, no question, I would do the same thing again because he should have got out of my way. And that's my best friend. It was a bit uncomfortable because we were sharing a private jet home. So we had to sit 2 of us on the same plane home, not talking to each other. But I just use that as an example of how aggressive. I mean, Keke Rosberg, I remember he thought I got in his way in 1980 something in the early days. So the next thing is he comes across in front of me and puts on the brakes until we almost crash together, or they'll push you off the track. It was really aggressive. Really, so now I don't understand how they can be joking around on Instagram, but that's the way they are, and that seems to be the way it works for them, and it's good fun for us to observe. But like you, I can't see how the system functions like that.
You're sitting on the other side of the fence now, as in the commentary box of Sky, and obviously you have to judge drivers, you have to criticize them. This year we had Hamilton, and I think also Verstappen moaning that, let's say, former Formula One drivers or racing drivers are criticizing them. I think it was after some comments of Nico Rosberg. How was it when you were active? Did you like when, I think in your case it would have been probably James Hunt, when he criticized you?
No, I was slightly uncomfortable about it. When I got the Benetton ride alongside Michael, he was in the newspaper. He was like, this is a waste of a seat, and really anti me. And I was quite upset about that. And then when he came to the first race, he was like, I came in, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I'm sorry. I'm like, wait, but it's too easy to say that now when you've given me all this bad press. So everybody's sensitive. And what I've learned in this business is you can say 1,000 positive things about a driver and say one negative thing, family and friends, feed it all straight back to them. And I had that with Michael, who I regarded in the highest way. I saw Michael Schumacher's skills as a teammate, as a rival, as a commentator. I mean, extraordinary. And then when he did something aggressive, I think against Barrichello in Hungary or something like that, when he, Michael pulled a few tricks, didn't he, in his day. And I said I thought that was unacceptable driving. We really didn't talk for nearly 5 years after that. Yeah, he was so, because I think what I said got translated and then put into German and put in a headline, probably out of context. And I found that really strange, how you can be so positive about somebody, because it wasn't difficult to be positive about Michael's speed and success and that. And then suddenly they wouldn't talk to you. I mean, I wouldn't talk to you for such a period of time. The funny thing is, the only parent who ever came up to me and was a bit unhappy with me because of what I said about his son was Duncan Coulthard. And DC had done something, and I was, I don't think I'm ever overcritical, because I know how hard it is to get to Formula One, and I know how hard it is to stay there. and to get some success. But the great irony of that story is that I was David's manager. I managed him for 11 years. So the only person who ever came up to me and complained to me was the father of the guy I was managing. Because I think actually I used to overcompensate a bit with David because people knew I was involved with him. So I used to try not to, I almost was too far the other way, to compensate.
When you are talking nowadays and commentating the races, is your heart still bleeding that you're not sitting in the cars?
I still think of myself as a racing driver and not a broadcaster. I have a driver's mentality, and I still race. In fact,
you did your good old Nürburgring last year.
Yeah, oh God, I loved that. It was fantastic. So, I mean, I know physically I couldn't do it anymore, but I miss it. I miss it badly, and so my job is, I think I've got a very simple job in many respects. My job is to put the F1 fan, in the cockpit and in the driver's head and maybe on the pit wall, and just transport them there and try to let them understand what it's like from a driver's perspective. So that's how I go about it. Yes, I do miss it. I wish I could still do it forever. And when I talk to like Damon, for example, who has
a clear-cut end of a career,
or Jody Scheckter or whatever, they have, and DC is another one. They have nil desire to get back in a race car, which I don't understand. I think if you tick the big box of being world champion, it helps you draw a line under it. Maybe if you leave your racing career, as I did my F1 career, a bit frustrated, maybe you're not able to draw that line in the same way.
Come to your career. I mean, you came into the spotlight with your Formula 3 fight with Ayrton Senna. I think Senna won all the races at the first half of the season.
First 9.
Yeah, and you then of the second half, and there was this big final. Did you already realize at that time that he's something special? Because, I mean, you were as fast as him apparently, at least in Formula 3 there. Yeah,
I mean, even before Ayrton arrived in Formula 3, everybody assumed he was going to win the championship, which surprised me a bit, but clearly he was gifted. I mean, when I think about the conversations we had in paddocks around the UK, or the fights we had in the steward's office when we crashed together, and the verbal fights, did I realise that I was racing against somebody who would become a global sporting icon and with a reputation and image that I think will continue to grow forever? This great man? No, of course not. But did we know he was a bit special, that he had a gift? Without doubt.
Yeah. I mean, with hindsight, you're always more clever. If you look back then, I mean, he has chosen Tolman for his first Formula 1 team, you Tyrrell. Did he make the better choice?
Well, we both went straight to F1, but let's be honest, Senna was going to F1 anyway. In a way, he helped my career because we had such a big fight and it became such a big story that everybody was watching it, and I got my chance to go to F1. So Tolman had decided they were going to take whoever won the championship, but I think they wanted it in anyway. Ken Tyrrell had decided he was going to give a test to the top Brit in the Formula 3 championship, which me and Senna won every race except for when we crashed together in Oulton Park. So clearly that was me who was going to get the Tyrrell test. So I think our paths were set. Ayrton was clever because he managed to move on quite quickly to Lotus. When I had my chance to go to Lotus, I couldn't get out of my Tyrrell contract, and Ken wouldn't release me. He had a 3-year deal with me. So, listen, I mean, Ayrton was one of the all-time greats. We lost him obviously way too early. So, yes, our careers touched in F3. We stayed quite close in the early days of F1 in particular, but I don't even consider myself to be discussed in the same conversation or same paragraph as Ayrton, because he's one of the gods.
But I mean, you also shined in your first season. You were second in Detroit, but why people didn't remember that as much as they remembered Ayrton Senna almost winning the Monaco Grand Prix?
Yeah, if I hadn't have crashed, I'd have been right there in the Monaco. Crashed in qualifying, didn't I? Which was my fault. Well, I had a brake issue, but My F1 career started better than Ayrton's because I was 5th in my very first race in Brazil. Then I was 2nd in Detroit, but then I crashed in Dallas. And that actually messed up my career because I broke my right foot really badly, but that fixed. And I broke my left ankle, and basically the foot was away from the leg. So later on in my career, it affected my ability to really get as fit as I needed to be. I had to get fit to drive in different ways. I couldn't run, and obviously I can't run today. But when it came to the left foot, 2 pedal cars, paddle shift, and then I had a big disadvantage at that point. So it actually messed up my career. And I think that's why in sports cars, I just was able to carry on, because they were always, until much later, 3 pedal cars.
Yeah. Was the left foot braking such a big thing? Because I remember Barrichello, he refused for a long time to use the left foot for braking.
He did. I think when I looked at Michael's traces and Mika's traces, when the way you lose the time is not the fast corners. Actually, quite often I'd be gaining time on Michael in a fast corner, but you gain so little, and you're taking a risk that you don't necessarily need to take. Where you find the time is in the slow corners. You're in a slow corner for a longer period, obviously. And the way you rotate the car, and if you watch Michael, he was always, and Mika's the same, always very happy to let the back of the car come around, get the car straight, pick up the throttle. And if you can do that on the brakes like this, brake and throttle, rather than having your right foot coming over to the brake and then having a transition back onto the throttle. And you watch Mika, he played with that the whole time. So yes, I think when the cars became better and we had the paddle shift, left foot braking became, we're only talking, the difference between the great Formula 1 drivers and the merely very good ones like myself is a 10th or 2 per lap. That's all you're talking about. But in a 60 lap race, it's a lot. And also it could often be a row on the grid or 2 rows on the grid. So then you were more caught up in first corner accidents, or you had to fight your way through and your teammate was gone or whatever. So that 10th or 2 is the difference.
I mean, all your results in '84 had then been wiped out because of the Tyrrell was disqualified. Was that maybe also a reason why people forgot about it? Because when you look in the record books, you don't find the 6 points for Detroit.
I know. I've still got the trophy at home from Detroit. My first of 10 podiums. I have 9 podiums. I didn't exist in 1984. So sitting alongside the Detroit podium are the 3 big screws with how they put my foot back onto my leg, because I did exist in 1984. I've limped ever since. I'm in pain ever since. So I've got the trophy and the screws for my foot, just to remind myself, actually, I did exist. So I was in a hospital just over there in the centre of London. They got me back from Dallas. Sid Watkins, they were going to cut off my foot.
Really?
Yeah, in America, because I had a problem and there was no blood circulation. Sid Watkins got me home, and a guy in the Harley Street clinic found a way with all of his friends, and they send pictures around, and they agree how something can be done. His medical colleagues, and then I'm recovering from this operation, and about 10 o'clock one night, I'm in a private room in a clinic. A journalist got through to me, a guy called Barry Gill, who's no longer with us, but said, I don't know why, he said, "Hello, Martin. Any comment on Tyrrell being disqualified for the year and everything being null and void?" I said, "What?" I didn't know about it. That's the first I heard. So I'm lying in bed, both feet up like this, full of plaster, and I pick up the phone, and to find out the race you smashed yourself up in, you didn't exist anyway.
Did you have any suspicion that there was something dodgy about that? I mean, you had to come in, I think, towards the end of the race to do a strange pit stop.
I was so green, to be honest. I used to say to Ken, why are we filling up this water tank? Why get a bigger tank? Why do I need to come in? I was so green, really. But do you know what? I mean, we didn't get thrown out for that. We got thrown out for having an auxiliary fuel tank.
Exactly, yeah.
And we didn't even, because they found a trace of fuel. They wanted Ken out of the championship because he wouldn't sign for something they wanted on the turbo engines, because we were the only team without a turbo.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would be, I'd go into a race at the back of the grid because I had no turbo boost. So we'd always be last in qualifying. And then, of course, our car was really light and nimble, and they had to turn the boost down on the others. So they wanted Ken. The only way to get this thing through they wanted, which they needed unanimity on, was to kick Ken out of the championship so he wasn't a signatory.
Yeah.
So we got thrown out for having an auxiliary fuel tank on a car where we never put more than 75% of the tank full anyway. We didn't even need the tank we had, let alone an auxiliary one for petrol, for fuel. I don't know. There were a lot of politics back in those days and silliness, and then as a driver you get caught up in it. But every day when I get out of bed, the first 5 minutes I can't really move. I've had a couple of operations, but it won't fix. Now I've got to maybe have it pinned, or I've decided to leave it. And I think, oh God, like they told me I was going to struggle when I got old, but I thought they meant 70 or 80.
Yeah.
I've been struggling since I was 40, really.
Okay.
The last 20 years. And then I think about Ayrton, and I think about Michael, and I think, you're really lucky, Martin. Because I had 3 big crashes where I could have died. At least one of them was bigger than Ayrton's crash, for example, when he was so unlucky. Yeah. May Day 1994. So that's how I think, a bit of pain from your ankle, you're the lucky one.
Mm-hmm. I mean, your teammate at Tyrrell was Stefan Bellof. Was he the same class like Senna?
He was a free spirit. He wasn't. Ayrton was very driven by the heart. Michael was driven from the head completely. Stefan was somewhere in between. He wasn't cerebral like Michael, but he was just a free spirit. He was more Gilles Villeneuve, this kind of devil may care, just unbelievable speed. Probably didn't know how or why, but just had a gift and a fearlessness that obviously in the end finished him. Yeah. I met his brother the other day.
Ah, okay.
At the FIA Hall of Fame.
Okay.
Which is nice.
Yeah. Then you had another German episode. You were for a year at Zakspeed, the only man who ever scored 2 points actually for this German team.
Yeah.
Why did you go there in the first place? I mean, that was not the best team, obviously.
No,
at the time.
I was running out of steam, really. My 3-year Tyrrell agreement finished, and Ken had no money. And then I went over to see Eric and saw the team. I just wanted to stay in Formula 1 somehow. I just knew we were lucky back in those days. I mean, in 1989, I think there were 39 cars in F1. So you could tread water and somehow stay around, which you can't do today, can you, with 20 cars. So I just needed to hang around, get myself back. I didn't get back to full fitness probably until 86 from my big shunt in 84. I was back in the car again in 85, but I wouldn't say I was really up and running again fully. So it was really the best opportunity for me to just stay in Formula 1. Yeah. And they, of course, had big plans, as every team does, in November, December and January, about the year ahead and more downforce and more power. And it was fine. Yeah. It was. But at the end of that year, I realised that I was doing the wrong thing. And that's why I left. Tom Walkinshaw, my sort of mentor, said, look, you're not doing yourself any good. Get out, which I did. Became world sports car champion, won Daytona, won a load of races in America, and by the end of the year I was signed for Brabham. So it sort of rejuvenated my image, if you like. And we're in the fashion business in motorsport. Drivers are, you get an image of whether you're good or not, and so it's more fashion than anything else.
But then again, Brabham ran out of money, but you got your big chance in the Benetton in 92. And if you look back at this season, I mean, in qualifying, Michael clearly dominated you, but in the races, you were a good match to him? Why was there such a difference between race and qualifying?
I think, well, Michael was kind of quite quickly the number one. So I think back in those days, there was, the pieces, aero pieces, the teams were tiny compared to today, and maybe engines or whatever. It was the same with Mick at McLaren. They were better than me in terms, of course, they were better racing drivers than me. They became world champions. So I never really excelled in qualifying, but I had a lot of experience, and so I worked more on my starts. I was much better than Michael at starting, which got in his head big time. And of course, I set my car up for the race. So I knew my strengths weren't qualifying. So my strength, and all the prizes are handed out on race day. So I worked more on that, and that's why through the races I could outperform Michael. But if you look towards the end of the year, especially the last race, he started to really move up a gear. So he was the new kid, and I was the more experienced one. So I think that experience showed up in the race, and in qualifying, less experience needed. Yeah.
Are you still annoyed that Michael won his first race because he did a mistake? Then he saw your car, he saw the worn-out tires, came into the pits, which probably should have been your pit stop. Or why didn't you pit that lap?
I do think about that. Spa 92. Yeah. I should have won 2 races that year. I passed Michael in Canada and was catching Gerhard, who'd over-revved his engine. So I was now P2. And I was going to win that race. I was quickest in the warm-up. My car was fantastic. I'd been following Michael for ages, and he kept blocking me. And eventually I passed him up against a back marker. And then I was catching Gerhard really quickly, about 7 seconds behind him. And then the differential, somebody, in fact I know exactly who, had put the bolts in the wrong way around.
Okay.
So that cost me my first victory. And then in Spa, the Williams were so dominant that year, weren't they? The 92 FW14B, was it?
I think so, yeah.
Was so with Nigel at the wheel. It was a wet day at Spa, and we could see the 2 Williams. And I was right on Michael's tail. And then Michael ran off at Stavelot. And I'm thinking, at the top of the hill, I felt some grip. It was drying out at Les Combes and this. And I'm thinking, I'm P4. Let's get some tyres. And found out the tyres were ready for me. I'm thinking, and then as we're going, and Michael went off the track, and it was a little bit wetter through Blanchimont.
Yep.
And now I'm P3, and I'm convinced Michael's broken his front wing, because the front wing on that car was really low, and if you went down the graph, you broke it. He's now on my tail. As we come into the old bus stop, he recognises just how damaged my wets are. And I just, at that moment, I'm like, I'll go one more lap. I'll go one more lap. I can still see the Williams. Don't go too early on the slicks. But I had felt the grip at the top. I think if I'd have been behind Michael, I would have pitted and he would have seen my tyres.
Yep.
But isn't that, that's what makes those great drivers, isn't it?
Yeah.
That Michael had that, had that capacity. So going back to my, the greats and the merely very good, the great drivers need 70%, let's say, of their capacity to drive the car, leaving 30% to look around, work out, think. And you hear it today, Fernando, a year or 2 back or whatever, or the kids today, they're driving an F1 race, and then they'll come on the radio going, which tyres is, so-and-so on, 4 cars back. Yeah. And they're thinking, and this ability to think about what's going on, whereas, the not-so-greats maybe need 75% of their capacity to drive the car and leaving less to track conditions, weather conditions, strategy, how the car's feeling and all that sort of thing. So it was that, I think that split-second decision was probably, I was reacting a little bit to the dampness of the track. It might have been subconsciously, you're on the podium, don't throw this away now, or whatever it was a bad decision. But that for me is what sport is all about, those critical, and that's why your Federers and your Djokovic's and your great sports personalities, that's why they have this feel, this touch, this gift. we saw it with Ayrton, didn't we? We saw it with Michael, and Prost came at it in a slightly different way because he was so measured in everything he did. But somebody like Nicky, I'm not entirely convinced Nicky Lauda was as fast as me or Gerhard. Yeah. I'm really not. And I raced against him, don't forget. In F1, but he was just so smart. He was so, and back in the day, he just was measured. He knew the cars were fragile. He knew he had to play the long game. He was so smart out of the car, getting everybody around it, all the pieces around him. And he won his championship through just being smart, and with guile is a word we'd use in English.
So you had a good season at Benetton and you got along fairly well with Michael, but still you lost your cockpit. Why? Could Walkinshaw, Tom, not protect you anymore? Or?
No, so I got the drive because I had some magnificent drives in the 1991 Jaguar, the XJR14, beautiful car, a Ross Brawn car. So Tom and Ross went to Benetton and Tom wanted me, because I wrote to Tom Walkinshaw when I was a kid. In 1979, I wrote to this man who had a BMW championship. He ran all the cars, 16 cars. I said, I think I'm going to be a top touring car driver. Please give me a chance. I want to drive. And my local track is Snetterton. Will you please give me a chance to drive one of your 16 cars here? And he did. And I ended up on the front row of the grid, had a fantastic race. The next race I won against Alan Jones and Hans Stuck and all sorts of people, Dieter Quester, David Hobbs. And overnight, I went from being a hobby racer to like on the international scene almost. And that was Tom Walkinshaw, was the man I wrote to. I sadly don't have a copy of the letter. So Tom took me sports car racing, touring car racing, and then took me to F1 with him. And no, I think already the fight between Tom and Flavio was going on, and Flavio once a year to this day says to me, I made a mistake firing you at the end of the year. So what really happened was, and I found out in a really bad way, an Italian journalist came up to me in Hungary in August and said, what are you doing next year? And I said, well, obviously I hope to stay with Bennett, because now I was really starting to have, I think I finished 11 of the last 12 races in the points, 5 times on the podium, got ahead of beat Michael in straight fights in several of them, like Monza and places like that later on. And I said, well, I'm hoping to stay at Benetton. He said, well, that's not going to happen, is it? Patrese already has that drive. That's how I found out about that. So basically what happened was Benetton were going active suspension the following year. Williams were already active, of course. And they thought Ricciardo could bring them a lot of knowledge and a lot of data. But it turns out to be not the case, because their systems were completely different, how they functioned. And I was told later on that all the knowledge and maybe the boxes of information he had was completely irrelevant. And of course, Michael kicked Ricciardo's backside hard, didn't he? They'd have been much better keeping me, but because I'd really got into, I think the other thing is, nobody realised how good Michael Schumacher was. So he's turned up and he's better than me, the old hand, and like, Brundle's rubbish. Instead of thinking, Schumacher's really good. And let's keep them together, because they, as a, the pair, the older guy and the younger guy is a really good pairing. Because back then, we didn't have simulators, we didn't have anything like as many sensors on the car. It was still, experience mattered. You still had to help the team develop the car, set the car up, gut instinct, experience, knowledge, bit of wise old head. Now it's so computer driven, isn't it? They turn up with their packages with the car set up in the sim, and that we didn't have that. So it would have been much better, I think. But hey, I mean, I never recovered from that. My career, I went to Ligier, and I went to McLaren at a bad time when Senna left.
That's what I wanted to say. It looked like another chance at McLaren, but unfortunately it was a year of McLaren with many technical problems. They had the Peugeot engine blowing up, so it was a bit unfortunate as well, you guess, that you had been at the wrong time at McLaren.
Yeah, well, if it had been the right time, Prost would have been in it. So we tested in Estoril, and Alan went out in the morning and got out. And then
That was after his retirement, we have to say, because I think he retired at the end of '93. But I think he tested still at McLaren then, because Ron wanted to have him back. Yeah.
Ron wanted him back. So I'm standing around all morning watching Alain test. So he obviously was thinking about it. And then he got out. I got in at lunchtime. I went around, and as I went to start my first flying lap, the engine blew up so hard, some pieces went through the bottom of the engine and damaged the track, damaged the racetrack.
Yeah.
I should already have known what. Anyway, I got the drive very late. I signed for McLaren on the Tuesday before the first race. Talk about preparation for a season, and I was on a race-by-race contract. So it just screws you in the head. Completely stupid way of going about it, and I'm angry with Ron to this day about how I got treated to. Because you can't perform. You drive every lap like you're fighting for your career, like you're fighting for your drive, sort of thing. So your mentality, and then Häkkinen's in the other car for good measure, who was Ron's golden boy. So I still got a couple of podiums in that car, and I think I lost 5 more podiums late in the race when the car blew up. Nearly died when Jos Verstappen hit my head when my car just broken in Brazil.
In Brazil,
First race, nearly died. Closest I've ever come to a fatal injury. And it was Jos's first race, I think, as well in F1. Probably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
because Leto was injured after his testing accident, so he had to jump in for him.
Yeah. It was right place, wrong time. But I don't know. I always in my mind, if the car and engine had been great, I think Alain might have driven it.
Yeah. Okay.
Otherwise, why was he in Estoril testing?
And how was Häkkinen compared to Michael?
Häkkinen, I think in pure speed, I think Häkkinen is the fastest driver I've ever had as a teammate or been a main rival to. I think he's the fastest, even faster than Ayrton. But Mika has had this lovely, empty-headed, no distraction way about going motor racing. So the engineers set the car. He just got in and drove it fast. I'll never forget. I think his only distraction was a tortoise, a pet tortoise. He had to put in a box. Yeah. And then Didier Cotton would pick him up and take him to a race. I remember we rendezvoused in Liège airport for Spa, and we had one Peugeot, and there's Didier Cotton, his manager, in the front. Mika was driving. I'm sitting in the back of this Peugeot that was sent to the airport for us. And every motorway intersection, Mika would start to go off the motorway, and Didier would go, "Not this one, Mika." Right. Off. Not this one, Mika. And eventually we went off at Verviers. The Verviers crossed there. And I realized, I'm sitting in the back thinking, this is fascinating. This guy, he's not even having to think how to get to the track. Yeah. He had 0 distractions in his life. He was just a pure racer. And I think that showed up in his results. Yeah. And he said to me one day, "You always confused me, man. I could never work out if you were..." Because I had my car dealerships, I had young family, I had other stuff going on. I felt I was 100% focused on being a racing driver. But Mika said, you confused me. I was never quite sure if you were F1 driver or a family man or a car dealer or whatever. I was like, that's an interesting observation. It's unusual for Mika to say things like that. Exactly. My feeling was I couldn't have given 1% more to my motorsport sort of thing. But from the other side of it, that was it. Mika, his simple life, his apartment, and just go flat out, to use his expression.
And then you were replaced by Nigel Mansell. Probably Ron would have changed his mind if he had known where it went to.
Yeah, I think, why did that? I don't know. I think by now I'm crashing a bit too much, but I felt really uncomfortable at McLaren because of the scenario I was in. Because then when I went to Ligier with a part-time drive,
you shared with Suzuki, I think.
With Suzuki. Yeah. Tom wanted me in the car, Tom Walkinshaw, but because of the Mugen Honda, we had this really uncomfortable thing. I'd turn up, blow the doors off Ollie Panis, and I drove beautifully in '95. I was second in Spa, between. I was fighting with Damon until the last lap for third in Spa. Sorry, I think Michael won the race. So I drove beautifully in '95, which reminded me then why I should have been better in that. But the car was so difficult. If your car keeps blowing up, and you know you're on a one race deal or something like that, you can't function like that. And then I went to Jordan, but the car was quite difficult at Jordan. But I crashed too many times, and I think my career was up. I didn't know it, but my career was up.
Yeah. But then in the end, you realized yourself that was my last year. It's
No.
not worth going on, or
No.
No.
I thought I was driving for Eddie in '97. I was 100% committed to being in F1 because I felt I had a lot more to give. And then this noise started that Brundle was moving to TV, to commentary with ITV. And I'm like, stop this. This is, no, I'm driving. And I thought I had a deal with Eddie. We didn't have it on paper, but it was, you know what Eddie's like. So I'm at the Birmingham Racing Car Show, and Louise Goodman, who I ended up working with at ITV, was the press officer for Jordan, came up to me. She said, how much longer are you here for? I said, maybe an hour, but do you need me to do something? I'll stay longer if you need me to do something. And she said, this is a bit like how I found out I was no longer driving for Benetton. She said, no, Eddie doesn't really want to tell you, so I'm here to tell you. We're shortly going to announce Ralf Schumacher and Giancarlo Fisichella as our drivers for this year. So that's how I found out. Not only was I not driving for Jordan, I was no longer a Formula One driver. Yeah. If I was Eddie, I'd have done the same thing. Two young guns, the car was much better. The '97 Jordan was much better. The '96 car was aerodynamically not a good car. And I think they kind of, because Gary Anderson left, didn't he, part of the way through that '96?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Gary just, his first Jordan was just a creation. I'm not being negative about Gary, but the '96 car, I remember the first test we did. I came in the pits after, and you can always tell in Barcelona how your car is because it's a pure downforce circuit. I said, we've got no rear grip. He said, we haven't got enough rear downforce. I said, we have to have. And he redesigned the suspension and this and that, but aerodynamically it didn't have what it needed. I got some top sixes in the thing, but as Eddie pointed out to me later on, I did crash too many times that year. And then I went into the commentary box and I felt terrible. So the '97 Melbourne race was, I'm starting to, the race is about to start, and I was literally having a panic attack, feeling that I was being left behind. Like, you can't start the race. I'm not ready. Yeah. And then after that race, I got some nice comments about my commentary, and 24 years later or whatever, I'm still doing it.
Yeah. Coming to the end, you mentioned already a car, the Jordan of '96. I think there's no other driver in the world who has driven so many different Formula One cars than you. How many have you?
54.
Now? 54. Look.
Everything from Fangio's, Mercedes, through to 3 of the latest hybrid cars.
Yeah. So which one did impress you most?
The car that impressed me the most in terms of the driving was Hamilton's 2008 McLaren, championship-winning McLaren, which would, if you remember those cars, there was just one big aero channel, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like a sculpture.
Yeah. And it was on old grooved Bridgestones or something, I seem to remember. And Indy Lal from the McLaren test team was on the radio going, slow down, slow down, slow down. Because I'm going through turn 1 in Silverstone, flat out. This car had so much grip, had so much poise and balance, and I immediately felt comfortable just, getting in and thrashing it. So, but all of the great cars I've driven all had something in common, whether it was Fangio's 196 or the Maserati 250F or things like that. It had a balance, had a lovely drivability, and you immediately felt, even if it was 50 years old or 60 years, you go, wow, hang on, this car is working with me straight away. And all the great cars were like that.
When you drive a car like the 250F, the Maserati, did you get a feel what these men 60 years ago had had to do in these cars, how good they had to be in order to master them on a circuit like the old Nürburgring, for example?
Yeah, it just blows your mind how you can do that speed. Even when you look at Le Mans in the 50s, down the Mulsanne, just trees. There were no barriers.
Yeah.
They were gladiators. They gave their life for. Hundreds of people have given their life for the Formula One that we have today. That's why we're guardians of this business that we're in. We have a responsibility to hand Formula One over better than we found it, even because people gave their lives for this. And that, they did it not for the money, not for the glory. They did it for the pleasure of driving these cars. Because you're going along, and even if you're just testing something, you're doing 150 miles an hour. What's that? 250, 280 or something. K's, and you're kind of looking down, and then you realise quite quickly why they preferred to be thrown out of the car than be in the crash. No seatbelts. So if you crash, you've got this big wheel and your legs are either side of a gearbox tunnel maybe, or a transmission tunnel. And you realise if you went down there, you're going to die anyway. And you're surrounded by fuel. The 70s cars were amazing, how much fuel you're just sitting in a bathtub of fuel, 4 tanks or something like that. So, and you realise, and they thought that was completely normal. But even my Tyrrell in 1984, do you remember? It stopped near my elbow. And I thought that was, it was a honeycomb car. It seemed to me to be, the highest level of safety. And now I look at it and think, why did you drive that? It looks completely ridiculous. So they were, I have total admiration because they were prepared. How many of them died every year? They lost drivers. Jackie Stewart talks about over 50 friends and colleagues who died while he was a professional racer.
Well, the problem was as well, because in those days they didn't only drive Formula One, they drove Formula 2, they drove Can-Am, they went to India,
whatever.
Le Mans obviously, so it was dangerous in all the places they went.
And even testing in Monza or something like that, people dying, you're right. So, but don't you think, I think it must have been like the wartime mentality or something.
Something like that,
where
must have been,
death wasn't as shocking. You know, if a driver dies now in the name of sport, it's unacceptable, it's shocking. Everybody is, as we had with Der Jules, and that's the thing. But back then it was a given that 2 or 3 would die every year, which I often used to think about that, about sitting in a driver's briefing of it used to be on a Sunday morning. Imagine looking around and thinking, 3 of us won't be here by the end of the season.
Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. But back then they thought it was completely acceptable to go racing at 300 kilometers per hour with no seatbelts, surrounded by fuel, and something aluminium, you'd put tuna in now or something.
On circuits with trees instead of Tech Pro or whatever. Okay, Martin, it was a great inside view about yesterday and today. We thank you very much.
Thank you.
To have you on the program. Und ich, liebe Zuhörer, ich verabschiede mich bis zum nächsten Mal. Wir haben dann wieder einen Rennfahrer im Programm. Ciao.